What black power means does not indicate, imply, ramify into, nor does it dictate that black power means anti-white.
In the annals of American politics, few figures shine as brightly as Congressman Mickey Leland. A dedicated public servant from Texas, he was not just a politician. He was a beacon of hope for the hungry and oppressed, particularly in East Africa. His unwavering commitment to combating famine and advocating for the marginalized marked him as a true champion of the people. But on August 7th, 1989, Mickey Leland's life was cut tragically short in a plane crash in Gambela, Ethiopia, during a humanitarian mission. Today we delve into the circumstances surrounding his mysterious death, an event shrouded in intrigue, unanswered questions, and whispers of possible government involvement. Born George Thomas Leland III on November 27, 1944, in Lubbock, Texas, a predominantly African-American neighborhood. His rise to prominence began with his education at Texas Southern University, where he became a leader in the civil rights movement. After serving in the Texas House of Representatives, Leland was elected to the U.S. House in 1979, representing Texas's 18th district. His legacy was cemented as he chaired the Select Committee on Hunger, where he tirelessly fought against hunger and malnutrition, particularly in Africa. However, as Leland gained prominence, so too did the challenges he faced.
Mickey Leland attended Atherton Elementary and Phyllis Wheatley High School. He then attended Texas Southern University.
He went into pharmacy and college intending to go to medical school, but soon after was propelled into government and politics and left his fledgling pharmacy career behind.
As a result of Mickey's political activities, John and Dominique Demenil spotted him.
John Demenil was quite an interesting character, liberal, leftist, very, very wealthy. He was determined to make a difference in Houston. Curtis Graves introduced him to Mickey Leland, and John Demenil fell in love with Mickey. And from that time on, he was a major supporter of Mickey Leland.
The Demenils were these extraordinarily sophisticated and civilized people, but basically they funded his political career, which gave him an enormous amount of freedom.
They were very supportive of Mickey because they found in him someone who had a similar capacity to be concerned about others.
It was a time when change was afoot in Texas politics.
I mean, Mickey really was a sight to see when he first showed up. He had an afro about the size of a basketball, and he wore a big old chain around his neck and a dashiki. And
first time I saw him, I said, I don't know what we're doing here. Who is this guy?
First day of the legislature, the Speaker of the House had to go down and beg him to take the chain off and the dashiki and put on a suit because he couldn't come out on the House floor without a suit and a tie.
First man I ever saw carry a purse. And I said I thought it was legitimate because men had to be bag men in politics to carry the money they needed.
And suddenly Craig and Mickey showed up, and it was like the Craig and Mickey show. The Texas legislature had never seen anything like this.
And yet he would come over with some of those old people that were some of the most right-wing, reactionary, conservative, whatever you want to call them, don't change, head-in-the-sand groups. And before you know it, they got together and they started to like each other.
Mickey wasn't in it for himself. He wasn't in it to get famous. He wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to help people.
Mickey realized that he could accomplish more for more people by doing that than he could by making a living for himself. as a pharmacist.
In the mid-1980s, he spearheaded efforts to address the famine crisis in Ethiopia and Sudan, bringing international attention to the plight of millions. His work garnered respect, but it put him in the crosshairs of political tensions and power dynamics. On that fateful day, in August 1989, Leland was on a mission to assess the humanitarian crisis in Fugnido, Ethiopia, when his plane tragically went down, killing all 16 on board.
Nearly a week passed with no sign of the missing. But hope had not been forsaken.
Leland's disappearance is causing an outpouring of concern all over Houston. This morning, Houston City Council members prayed for him and others with him. Last night, 400 people attended a prayer vigil held for him and the 13 other people on his plane. For now, the search for Leland and his entourage has ended in Ethiopia, where it is 8 o'clock at night.
We all pray that he's safe and that he and the others with him on that humanitarian mission will be found and that they'll all be safe.
Among the deceased was renowned writer Roberta Warwick, known for her poignant stories of Africa. But what exactly happened on that flight? Eyewitness accounts and reports from the region raised eyebrows. Was it merely an accident, or was there something more sinister at play?
Shedding his dashiki, Leland made his way to the United States House of Representatives, filling a seat vacated by Barbara Jordan.
Mickey was a talker, and Mickey would talk with anybody about anything. And even though they disagreed with him, and sometimes hated what he was saying, they ended up loving him as a person, and he loved and respected them as persons, in spite of the disagreement.
But he would also do things that were kind of off the beaten path of being Houston's congressman. He never limited himself to that.
Mickey jumped on every issue that came up, to be honest with you. Making sure that the bilingual amendment to the Voting Rights Act stayed in place. I was working for him when he went on the floor of the House and spoke in Spanish, which was in violation of the House rules to speak in a foreign language.
Mickey knew all along that he was part of a larger cause.
One of the great things about him as a person was that he learned to educate his constituents that he would fight for their interests, but fight for larger causes too.
He was a civil libertarian. He was a humanist. It had nothing to do with the color of his skin. So if he talked about the rights of Palestinians to Israelis, it wasn't as a black, it wasn't even as an American. It was a passion of civil liberties, of human freedom.
It's Friday, and we've had false signal after false signal, and they still have not been found. With our technology, with our sophistication, there should be more definition of this thing by now.
World News Saturday. Here's Carol Simpson.
Good evening. It's been 5 days since a plane carrying Texas Congressman Mickey Leland and 15 others disappeared in the wilds of Ethiopia. And still there's no word, no signs of what could have happened. 4 U.S. helicopters joined what's now become an international search for the congressman's plane. A search that had to be called off early today on account of bad weather. As each day passes, however, there's growing fear that the outcome of the search may produce a tragic result. We have 2 reports, and we begin with Richard Sergey in Addis Ababa.
Poor weather in the Ethiopian capital briefly delayed today's search operation. It gave the crews flying the American Black Hawk helicopters a little extra time to get ready for their first mission here.
We're looking for a down twin otter, white with blue markings, the best we can determine. We don't know exactly where it's at.
With the weather improving, the choppers, which are able to fly lower and for longer periods, took off. 2 giant U.S. Hercules with sophisticated electronic gear on board also joined in. While the rescue planes are in the air, a U.S. Ethiopian task force continually monitors their progress. The Air Force released pictures of their search today in a remote and rugged area to the west of the Ethiopian capital. The helicopters, which are refueled in midair, are crisscrossing the flight path to a refugee camp where Leland's plane was heading before it disappeared. Late today, the rescue aircraft returned from the intensive search without finding any trace of the missing plane. But two of Leland's congressional colleagues, here to monitor the situation, say they haven't given up hope.
We'll be going out every day until we locate Congressman Leland's plane and his party.
Mickey's my brother. Until we find him and know everything that we have to know, I'm going to remain optimistic.
Tonight, a U.S. Embassy official defended the military's effort from criticism that not enough was being done to find Leland.
To date, we have searched an area of 100,000 miles, which is equivalent to the state of Wyoming.
Publicly, U.S. officials say they are optimistic that Leland's plane will be found, but privately they are expressing pessimism with each passing day. Richard Sergey, ABC News, Addis Ababa.
This is Kathleen Dulaski in Washington. After a detailed briefing from State and Defense Department officials this morning, Leland's staff members withdrew yesterday's criticism of the U.S. government search effort.
We have assurances that the commitment from the top, which we knew existed and which we acknowledged, that commitment is still there. And further, that sense of commitment and sense of urgency are now operating at all levels.
We had no doubt yesterday that we were conducting this thing with diligence and with all the available resources and all necessary resources, and now we seem to be all in agreement.
To demonstrate their diligence, Pentagon officials gave the press an exhaustive briefing and explained that weather and a lack of information had hindered their search. Leland's plane was headed for a refugee camp 260 miles west of the Ethiopian capital. But since the plane carried enough fuel for a return trip, search teams say it could have veered off course as much as 500 miles. Also, searchers are losing hope that they will pick up signals from an emergency locator beacon on board the plane.
As time passes, the power output of that emergency locator beacon will decline eventually to the point we won't be able to hear it anymore.
Captain Bloyer says if anyone survived after the plane went down, given the moderate climate, they could still be alive. Although that hope is fading, the U.S. government is intensifying its search. The Pentagon is sending 5 more search and transport planes and 100 additional people to be in place by Monday, making this the largest military search for a civilian that Pentagon officials can remember. Kathleen Dulaski, ABC News, the Pentagon.
The search had grown into a national obsession in Ethiopia. Regular flights were cancelled. The American military arrived and with the aid of the Ethiopian Air Force combed hundreds and thousands of square miles. The cooperation was extraordinary since the relationship between Ethiopia and the United States at the time was strained. But Mickey Leland was not an ordinary visitor here.
In the wake of his death, questions emerged. The plane crash occurred during a time of heightened political tensions regarding U.S. aid to Africa. Leland had recently met with prominent figures like Pope John Paul II and Cuban President Fidel Castro, advocating for humanitarian efforts. Could his outspoken nature have made him a target? Over the years, various conspiracy theories have emerged regarding Leland's death. Some suggest government involvement, arguing that his advocacy for hunger relief threatened the status quo. Was he silenced to prevent him from uncovering deeper issues within the aid system? His efforts to engage in international diplomacy and humanitarian relief would have been perceived as a challenge by those who preferred a more traditional approach to foreign policy. In the years following his death, Leland's legacy continued to inspire change. Numerous initiatives and buildings have been named in his honor, including the Mickey Leland International Terminal at Houston's George Bush Intercontinental Airport, and various educational programs aimed at empowering young men and women. Yet the question lingers: why did the investigation into the crash seem to fade into obscurity? Why were the circumstances surrounding his death not more thoroughly examined? Leland once said, I am as much a citizen of the world as I am of this country. His commitment to global citizenship and humanitarian efforts left an indelible mark, yet it also left a trail of unanswered questions. As we reflect on his contributions, we must also remember the mystery that surrounds his tragic end. A reminder that sometimes the truth remains hidden in the shadows of power. Mickey Leland's life was one of courage and compassion. While we may never fully understand the circumstances of his death, we can honor his legacy by continuing the fight against hunger and injustice worldwide. Let us not forget men and women like Mickey Leland who have dedicated their lives to serving others.